Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 51, The Four-Party Talks. Marin did not completely believe the intelligence of old Sten Sture, so he sent spies to the earldom of Oldenburg to get information. After many twists and turns, his intelligence personnel did get the news from the court members of the earldom of Oldenburg. King Hans of Denmark did send a secret letter, and he did say that he would not only help the earldom of Oldenburg to capture Jever, but also blackmail Marin for a large sum of money. A large sum of money. Although the number is unknown, it indirectly confirms the accuracy of old Sten Sture's intelligence. Of course, the large sum of money that King Hans of Denmark said was actually tens of thousands of gold coins. After all, the Danish fleet also needs to pay an appearance fee, and it cannot come for nothing. However, old Sten Sture exaggerated the number 10 times, which stimulated Marin. Marin no longer hesitated. He sent his confidant Kohler to Lübeck to contact the other party and suggested inviting representatives from Hamburg and Sweden to hold a four-party meeting to unify the front and work together to deal with Denmark, the common enemy. Coincidentally, when Kohler arrived in Lübeck, old Sten Sture also sent his deputy Svante Nielsen to Lübeck to request financial and material support. Old Sten Sture estimated that during the autumn harvest season, the Danes would temporarily hold the offensive and divide their troops to collect food. This period of time is the best time to support Sweden. Although old Sten Sture has prepared enough supplies, the more the better. The more fully prepared, the safer Stockholm will be. Moreover, during this period after the autumn harvest, Denmark will allocate many ships to transport food. During this period, there will be a blockade blank period in Swedish waters. In that case, Sweden can use this period of time to import weapons, ammunition and various supplies from abroad. Svante Nielsen was also very excited to meet Kohler. He knew that old Sten Sture's plan worked. When Kohler proposed to Lübeck Grand Speaker Tagfact the idea of uniting the maritime forces of Lübeck, Hamburg and East Frisia to annihilate the Danish fleet, Tagfact and Svante Nielsen were stunned by this crazy idea. But, a moment later, Svante Nielsen was excited. Because Kohler also said that Marin would send 20,000 troops to unite the armies of Lübeck and Hamburg to capture the Duchy of Holstein, the Duchy of Schleswig, and even the Jutland Peninsula in the heart of Denmark. Once Marin did this, the Danish army in Sweden would panic and be at a loss. Because, if the old nest was taken down, the Danes would be in chaos. At that time, the Swedish army could counterattack in a big way. Moreover, by then, the Danes would definitely be eager to withdraw their troops to retake the two duchies and the Jutland Peninsula. Because these three places are the agricultural centers of Denmark and the most densely populated places in Denmark except Zealand. If these three places are lost, Denmark's national strength will be greatly hit. Of course, the Swedes will not let the Danish army withdraw easily. Svante Nielsen immediately stated that as long as Marin is willing to send troops to the Danish mainland, the Swedish army will do its best to hold back the Danish army. If the Danish army dares to withdraw all to the mainland, the Swedes will dare to occupy the Danish-controlled area at the southernmost tip of the Scandinavian peninsula. There is the only area in Sweden suitable for agriculture and an important coastal area for controlling the Øresund Strait. When Kohler stated Marin's strategic goal, Lübeck Grand Speaker Tagfact was also excited. Because Marin said that he would divide the Duchy of Holstein into two and give it to Lübeck and Hamburg, which participated in the war. Coincidentally, the Free City of Lübeck and the Free City of Hamburg were separated from the Duchy of Holstein. Although they no longer have to pay taxes to the Duke of Holstein, in name, the people of the two cities are all subjects of the Duke of Holstein. The current Duke of Holstein is none other than King Hans of Denmark. However, Denmark and the Hanseatic League are enemies and competitors. Therefore, in the Duchy of Holstein, Lübeck in the east and Hamburg in the west are both suppressed by policies. Although the two cities are within the territory of the Duchy of Holstein, the caravans of the two cities cannot pass through the border of the Duchy of Holstein and communicate smoothly. Even Kohler came here by taking a detour from the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg south of Hamburg to Lübeck. The distance between Lübeck and Hamburg is only 60 kilometers, but this distance, like a natural barrier, hinders the exchanges and cooperation between the two cities. Fortunately, there is a Stecknitz Canal built between 1391 and 1398 in the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg. The two Hanseatic cities can trade and exchange through this small canal. However, this canal belongs to the Duke of Saxe-Lauenburg. Obviously, Saxe-Lauenburg will not let them use it for free, and will still charge a lot of tolls. Moreover, the most important thing is that this canal is a small canal, which is only suitable for small boats to navigate and inland transportation. Large ships over 100 tons cannot pass through this small canal. In fact, Lübeck and Hamburg really want to build a direct canal for large ships over 200 tons. Unfortunately, the land between the two cities belongs to Denmark, the mortal enemy of the Hanseatic League, and the Danes will never allow a canal to be built between the two cities. If the Duchy of Holstein is obtained through war, then a canal can be built between the two cities smoothly, and shipping can be reached in advance. In this way, the people of Lübeck will no longer have to pass through the Øresund Strait in Denmark and accept the blackmail of the Danes. What is your request? Our Lord Count hopes to obtain the Duchy of Schleswig and the County of Oldenburg. What? Lord Marin's appetite is too big, right? Our two families divide a duchy, but he wants a duchy and a county alone. Lübeck Grand Speaker Tagfact said dissatisfiedly. Your Excellency, our Earl can send out 20,000 troops and guarantee to defeat the Danish army. Isn't that enough? Kohler said seriously. But the Danes are strongest in the navy, and their army is just average. Tagfact retorted. You have to understand that occupying Schleswig is equivalent to bordering Denmark. Do you think the Danes will be willing to give up the Duchy of Schleswig? We are helping you to block the Danish attack. Kohler said. It seems to make sense. So, I will send someone to invite Mr. Heisenberg, the Grand Speaker of Hamburg, to come and discuss it together. Okay, I can also reply to our Earl. He has said before that he can come in person. That would be the best. So, when Tagfact sent someone to invite the Grand Speaker of Hamburg, Kohler also sent his men to rush back to Aurich to report to Marin. When he learned that a four-party negotiation could be held, Marin did not delay and took a ship directly to Hamburg. After arriving in Hamburg, he rode a horse to go to Lübeck via the Duchy of Saxe-Lauenburg. 20 days later, Marin appeared at the negotiation table in Lübeck. Lord Marin, please describe your strategy in detail. Tagfact spoke first. Okay, no problem. My plan is to assemble the fleets of Lübeck and Hamburg separately, and then deliberately spread the news to the Danes. Won't this allow the Danes to divide their troops to intercept our Hamburg fleet? Hamburg Grand Speaker Heisenberg objected. Mr. Speaker, don't worry. We just want Denmark to allocate some warships to intercept the Hamburg fleet. But the Hamburg fleet is not sure of defeating Denmark. Heisenberg said helplessly. Don't worry, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the comparison of combat power. According to the intelligence exchange just now, Lübeck can gather 110 warships, and Hamburg can gather about 90. Obviously, the Danes will pay more attention to the Lübeck fleet. Therefore, although they can gather 200 warships, they will never send more than half of the warships to besiege the Hamburg fleet. They will definitely keep at least half of the warships to monitor the Lübeck fleet. In other words, the warships sent by the Danes will not exceed 100. Yes, Lord Marin, but the Hamburg fleet is not sure of winning. And what about us, Mr. Heisenberg? The East Frisian county can send 8 500-ton warships and 15 250-ton warships. What is a ton? At this time, Tagfact and Heisenberg asked at the same time. Marin was also stuck. He forgot that the unit of measurement, ton, is currently only used in the East Frisian county, and other countries do not know this quantifier yet. Then, he spent some time explaining the value of this unit to the two of them. That means you can only take out 23 warships? Tagfact asked. Yes, Mr. Speaker, but my plan is to let Hamburg hold the Danish fleet in front first. Then, my fleet will attack the Danish fleet from behind, defeat them, or even annihilate them. Lord Marin, I can't believe what you said. Because adding 23 warships will not bring too many advantages. Tagfact and Heisenberg did not believe in the combat effectiveness of the East Frisian warships, and their thinking was still stuck in the era of boarding battles. Moreover, Marin's fleet was formed very recently, and I don't know if it will work. Okay, let's do this. After a while, I will send a few cannons, and you can try to install them on the big ships. It is very useful to bombard enemy ships. However, the two great speakers were still skeptical. In desperation, Marin had to say, so. After I go back, I will send 2 250-class warships to demonstrate the use of naval artillery for you. By then, you will understand the role of artillery in naval battles. Marin knew that it was useless to say it, so it was better to tell them with reality. However, Marin refused to send warships. If they learned the structure and construction of warships, they would also suffer. Therefore, it is most appropriate to send 250-class armed merchant ships. In this way, the first four-party negotiations did not make significant progress. The problem is that the people of Lübeck and Hamburg do not quite believe in the role of artillery in naval warfare as Marin said. In fact, with 8 warships and 15 armed merchant ships, Marin also has a chance to defeat the Danish navy. However, it is too risky to do so. If he loses, then Marin will completely lose his sea power and maritime trade will be affected. Therefore, Marin pulled up 2 powerful maritime forces, Lübeck and Hamburg, and used their warships to attract the attention of the Danish navy. Then, his own fleet raided the Danish fleet from behind. In this way, the Danish navy basically has no chance of winning. This is also the difference between the two sides in this meeting. If the performance of the 2 armed merchant ships sent by Marin conquers the 2 great speakers, then the negotiations will continue. Otherwise, the 2 Hanseatic cities have no confidence in fighting a decisive battle with the Danes. Because once they lose, the Hanseatic League may be unable to recover. As for Marin's 20,000 troops defeating the Danish army on land, they have no doubts. Because the battle example of Marin defeating Saxony's 26,000 troops with 10,000 troops has spread throughout Germany, and no one doubts the combat effectiveness of Marin's army. Moreover, the Danish army has never been too strong. It's just that if you want to defeat Denmark, the decisive victory at sea is the most important. Because Denmark has always been a country that relies on the navy. Therefore, the 2 great speakers are waiting for the combat effectiveness test of the armed merchant ships using artillery sent by Marin. Once what Marin said is true, then the 4-party talks will start again. Then, it was time for everyone to gather their strength and attack Denmark at the same time. Of course, although they did not reach a consensus on the military action plan, they did reach a consensus on supporting Sweden in its fight against Denmark. They would take advantage of the opportunity when Denmark sent ships to transport grain during the autumn harvest to quietly send ships to support Sweden with a large amount of weapons, armor and other supplies to enhance Sweden's ability to fight Denmark. Chapter 52, News from Rome. After the 4-party talks, Marin returned to East Frisia along the original route. After returning to Auric, he met his father-in-law, Archbishop Rovere, who was holding his grandson. However, Marin felt that his father-in-law had something to talk to him about. Sure enough, after coaxing little Caesar, Archbishop Rovere pulled Marin into the study with a mysterious look on his face, and asked the waiters to withdraw. "What's wrong? Father-in-law." "My dear son-in-law, I have good news for you. My people have finally been arranged to be with Alexander VI and his son." "Oh. Congratulations." Marin was also very happy. Because this shows that his father-in-law is closer to the position of Pope. And he will soon become the Pope's son-in-law. But what's wrong? "The money for arranging the Roman bishops has been spent," Archbishop Rovere said embarrassedly. He is now a wanted man, without industrial support, and can only rely on Marin's sponsorship. "That, no problem, I'll ask Kohler to give you another 100,000 gold coins. He must unconditionally support his father-in-law's becoming the Pope. After all, he is counting on it in the future." "Well, now, we have arranged the manpower, when do you think we should start?" Archbishop Rovere wanted to hear Marin's opinion. "By the way, father-in-law, have you made any arrangements for the Roman army?" Marin suddenly remembered. This matter is very important, because Caesar Borgia is the commander-in-chief of the papal army, and there are many of his people in the army. If Alexander VI died, it would be very troublesome if Archbishop Rovere returned to Rome and was opposed by the army under Caesar Borgia. Before, Marin planned to give the 10,000 troops of the Teutonic Kingdom to Archbishop Rovere as a guard. But now Marin needs those 10,000 people to fight Denmark. Then, the only ones who will go to Rome with Archbishop Rovere are the 100 Pope guards. This is obviously not enough to guarantee safety. If the army of the Papal States rebels and attacks Archbishop Rovere, it will be troublesome. Army arrangement. Archbishop Rovere obviously neglected this. Of course, even if you poison the Borgia father and son, what will you do if their remnants launch a mutiny to kill you? This. Archbishop Rovere obviously realized the seriousness of the problem. In fact, the current army of the Papal States is completely controlled by Caesar Borgia. The armies of the old feudal forces were all expelled by him with mercenaries. Now, even if Archbishop Rovere wants to intervene in the army of the Papal States, it is unlikely. Because those troops were recruited by Caesar Borgia himself, not the troops of the original feudal nobles of the Papal States, and it is not easy to win them over. However, Caesar Borgia's army is not large, with a scale of only 4,000 people. Moreover, they have to be dispersed in several places in the Papal States. There are only about 2,000 people who really guard Rome. Marin thought about it and decided to let Archbishop Rovere postpone the action. He decided to go to the southern region to recruit 5,000 mercenaries. Of course, he did not let these 5,000 recruits help Archbishop Rovere. Marin decided to train these 5,000 recruits with him, led by veterans. Then, he selected 5,000 from the veterans and followed Archbishop Rovere to the south. Then, he took 15,000 veterans and 5,000 recruits to fight Denmark. As for the country, Marin planned to use those militias to guard, still commanded by old Hoffman, just like when he fought against Saxony. However, Marin did not have so many ships to transport so many people to Italy at one time. Therefore, Marin must first choose a place to settle these 5,000 people. This place must be near Italy, but not in the area controlled by Spain. Because the current pope is Spanish. If the pope knew that he was going to murder the Spaniards, wouldn't he turn against himself? But it can't be too far from Italy. Otherwise, when Alexander VI died, if the distance was too far, even if the army was transported there, the new pope would have been elected, and it would be too late. Sicily and Sardinia, which were close to Rome, could not be used to house the army because they were Spanish territory at that time. After much thought, Marin decided to find a small island near the coast of Tunisia to house the army. Marin suddenly remembered that the two paddle boats on the Egyptian route had discovered two small islands west of Malta. One was called Lanosa and the other was called Lampedusa. There were no troops stationed on the two islands. However, after landing and investigating, Marin's crew found that Lanosa was smaller and lacked fresh water. Only a small number of Italian fishermen stayed there from time to time. Lampedusa, further south, originally had a small fishing village, but it was unfortunately invaded by Berber pirates and seemed to have been destroyed. Now, no one lives on Lampedusa. Because it is too close to North Africa and there are no garrisons stationed, it is easy to be invaded by North African pirates. However, this is not a problem for Marin's 5,000 troops. The pirates would be scared to death if they met them. As for why they didn't go to the larger island of Malta. Sorry, it is now controlled by the Kingdom of Aragon in Spain. Although it was not carefully managed, there are Spaniards there. Hiding soldiers there will definitely be known by Ferdinand II. Therefore, Lampedusa Island near the coast of Africa is a good choice. This island is currently uninhabited, and there are fresh water resources on the island. According to the sailors who have been to this island, there is a spring in a valley on the island, which is enough for thousands of people to drink. Even crops can be grown. For Marin, having such a place that can provide fresh water is enough. As for food, Marin has plenty of it, just transport a few more ships. Then, Marin and Archbishop Rovere agreed that Marin will start to transport the army to Lampedusa Island in batches. Then, people were sent to various countries to buy second-hand ships. After all, when Alexander VI dies, Archbishop Rovere must ensure that the 5,000 soldiers on the island can be transported to the Papal States within 1 or 2 times. Otherwise, the situation will not be stable. Once Alexander VI dies, these people will board the second-hand ships they bought on Lampedusa Island and head straight to the Papal States. After landing, they will escort Julius II to Rome. And the whole process will probably take several months. In short, Archbishop Rovere will have to ascend to the throne of Pope in 1503, as in the original history. However, compared to the original history of ascending to the throne of Pope at the end of November 1503, it should be a few months faster. Chapter 53, Asking for a Gun. Soon after Marin came back, he sent 2 armed merchant ships to Hamburg and Lübeck to demonstrate artillery battles. However, before sending out the warships, Marin was not very willing to let Lübeck and Hamburg know that he was equipped with iron cannons on a large scale. So, the wretched Marin asked the craftsman to paint a layer of copper paint on the outside of the cannons on the ship. In this way, even if Lübeck and Hamburg saw the cannons on Marin's ship, they would hesitate whether to learn from Marin's practice. Because the cost of such artillery is too damn high. The price of copper is so expensive, and you have so many copper-heavy artillery equipped with you, is there no money to spend? Even the rich Lübeck and Hamburg have to hesitate. Even if they want to equip heavy artillery, they have to consider the terrible cost. Even if they are equipped, they can only be in small quantities. The artillery on these 250-level armed merchant ships is no longer the original 12-pound cannon. Since the steel mill was built, the foundry has a supply of molten steel, so it is natural to improve the artillery. Although, due to the level of craftsmen, the carbon content has not been accurately controlled. For example, Marin's craftsmen wanted low-carbon steel, but they might produce medium-carbon steel. Want to produce medium-carbon steel, but produce low-carbon steel. Of course, high-carbon steel will not be wrong, because the furnace wall with graphite substrate is required for smelting high-carbon steel, and the environment is different. However, even so, both medium-carbon steel and low-carbon steel are suitable for casting cannons, which are much stronger than wrought iron. Therefore, the cannon foundry quickly improved the 12-pound cannon to 18 pounds without changing the size. Moreover, the total weight dropped from 2 tons to about 1.8 tons. Even so, if calculated according to the copper price, such a copper cannon would be worth as much as 2,800 gold coins. Marin equipped an armed merchant ship with 20 heavy copper cannons. Wouldn't the cost of the cannon alone be 56,000 gold coins? When seeing the 40 heavy copper cannons on the 2 ships, the 2 wealthy Hanseatic cities of Lübeck and Hamburg were also stunned by Marin's wealthy handwriting. How could this be a war? It was like using gold bricks to compete with bricks. However, Captain Kidd, who led the team, explained that these coppers were all cheap coppers bought by Columbus from India. In fact, the value was only 1/10 of the price in Europe. In this way, the 2 Hanseatic cities reluctantly accepted it. Indeed, the cannon on a ship was worth 5,600 gold coins. Although it was also rich, it was much easier to accept than 56,000 gold coins. The Hanseatic League knew about the opening of the Indian route. However, Spain and Portugal have been arguing over who discovered India first, Columbus or da Gama. The Hanseatic League was also very jealous of the huge profits of the Indian spice trade. However, they had no information about ocean voyages and had no plans to do so. Because even if they followed the routes of Spain and Portugal, they were unwilling to bear the common anger of Spain and Portugal. After all, the Hanseatic League couldn't even deal with Denmark, and if they provoked Portugal again, they would be courting death. The Hanseatic League had also heard that prices in the East were cheap. They had no doubt that Marin could get copper that was 10 times cheaper. They even understood why Marin had only 23 warships. One warship required so many copper cannons. Want more warships? There wasn't so much cheap copper. After sighing, the 2 warships began to demonstrate naval warfare under the watchful eyes of representatives from Lübeck and Hamburg. This time, the 2 warships 2505 and 2506 were sent. The sailors and gunners on the ships were all very experienced veterans. In fact, Marin deliberately picked a group of the best sailors and gunners to demonstrate. Therefore, when manipulating sailboats and firing cannons, they moved like flowing water without any delay. An old 200-ton merchant ship of the Hanseatic League used as a target ship was smashed on the side after several rounds of salvos by 2 250-class warships at a distance of nearly 100 meters under the watchful eyes of representatives from the 2 cities, and sank into the sea after taking in water. It's really amazing, and the power is extraordinary. The representative of Lübeck praised. It's just that the cost is too high. The Hanseatic representative smiled bitterly and shook his head. The 2 representatives didn't know that the cannons on Marin's ship were all made of medium and low carbon steel, and the cost was much lower than copper. It's just that Marin, this wretched guy, painted copper paint on the outside of the cannon, deliberately causing the representatives of Lübeck and Hamburg to misunderstand. In fact, the city representatives sent by Lübeck and Hamburg today are all naval officers from their respective naval officers. They came here today not only to test the authenticity of Marin's statement, but also to spy on Marin's new naval tactics. To put it bluntly, they want to steal the skills. But now the 2 of them have stolen the skills. But there's nothing they can do even if they learn it. There are so many copper-made copper cannons, even the very wealthy Lübeck and Hamburg may not agree. Of course, it's not that the 2 cities can't afford it. But the parliament will definitely not approve it. The 2 Hanseatic cities are both parliamentary. The parliament has to consider the interests of many parties and involves a wide range of issues. The members of the 2 cities are all big Hanseatic merchants. What are the characteristics of merchants? Just haggle. You let the Hanseatic merchants and councillors of the 2 cities spend 56,000 gold coins to equip a ship with artillery? Are you kidding? It will definitely be rejected. You know, the cost of 56,000 gold coins can buy 30 merchant ships of more than 200 tons. For these Hanseatic merchants, merchant ships can make more money, can artillery. However, the scene of heavy artillery volleys was too shocking. After the 2 representatives went back, they still tried their best to persuade the parliament to buy a few heavy artillery and study new naval warfare methods. In the end, the parliaments of the 2 cities agreed with the representatives' suggestions. As a result, the 2 Hanseatic cities of Lübeck and Hamburg not only recognized the combat effectiveness of the Marin navy, but also issued an order for heavy, bronze cannons. Among them, Lübeck ordered 10 heavy artillery. Hamburg, on the other hand, ordered 8. This heavy artillery was actually used by the 2 cities for testing. The key is that it is necessary to show the power to the parliament. Only if the parliament approves it will it agree to allocate funds to purchase more heavy artillery. After receiving the order, Marin immediately invited top artillery craftsmen such as Old John to first use pig iron to make an iron mold for casting 18-pound bronze cannons. Because of the rich experience in using iron molds, and the casting of 18-pound cannons, several masters were also skilled, so it was not too difficult. Moreover, casting bronze cannons is much simpler than casting iron cannons. Because bronze liquid is much more stable than molten iron, it is not easy to go wrong. Unlike molten iron, if an iron mold is used, it is easy to cause the cannon body to become gray iron, causing it to become brittle and affect the strength of the cannon body because the cooling speed is too fast. However, there is no such concern when using bronze liquid. It just so happens that the hundreds of tons of copper that Marin brought back from India are still stored in large quantities. So Marin provided the two cities with successfully cast bronze 18-pound heavy cannons at a friendly price of 350 gold coins per cannon. At the same time, Marin also provided the loading standards for shells and gunpowder to prevent the other party from loading gunpowder and blowing up the cannon barrel without qualified gunners. Of course, this standard was formulated according to the gunpowder standard. After all, Marin was the only one in Europe that used granulated gunpowder. In addition, Marin also made an agreement with Lübeck and Hamburg. After the autumn harvest, he would invite Swedish representatives to hold a second four-party meeting to determine the time and details of the action. Chapter 54 War needs an excuse. No matter what kind of war you fight, it is best to stand on the moral high ground. Otherwise, you will be beaten up. Just like Hitler with a mustache, even if Germany is strong, it will still suffer in the face of a group fight all over the world. Therefore, finding a reasonable excuse for the war is to avoid being beaten up. In fact, if the war really starts, Marin is not very afraid of Denmark. Maybe Marin's current naval power is not as good as Denmark. However, the army is definitely stronger than Denmark. What's more, the Danes have now pulled most of their army forces to Sweden. Even if it doesn't work at sea, Marin can rely on himself to flatten the earldom of Oldenburg, the Principality of Holstein, the Principality of Schleswig and the Jutland Peninsula on land. At that time, Marin can completely use the land territory as a bargaining chip to force Denmark to bow its head. However, people should not be too arrogant. Being too arrogant can easily lead to being beaten up. Therefore, even if Marin wants to move Denmark, he must find a suitable excuse. We need to make everyone think that Denmark is the bad guy, and Marin is the victim who is forced to fight back. In this way, after the fight, other countries will not stand on Denmark's side and will not let Marin be beaten up. It would be even better if Lübeck and Hamburg were involved. Not only can we use the powerful navies of the two city-states, but we can also let them share the pressure and avoid becoming the focus. As far as the Quadruple Alliance is concerned, Sweden has a sufficient excuse: the tyrant, King Hans of Denmark, is unjust and Sweden deposed him. Lübeck and Hamburg also have excuses, because in order to fight the war against Sweden, Denmark raised the toll on the Øresund Strait and extorted the merchant ships of the Hanseatic League. Therefore, they can also fight back with the reputation of being blackmailed by Denmark. Only Marin has no suitable excuse at present. The letter from King Hans of Denmark can be used as an excuse. However, that is superstition, and Marin can't steal it. Therefore, before the Danes really came to blackmail Marin, Marin had no excuse to use troops against Denmark. However, the Quartet Alliance is about to start troops after the autumn harvest. If no excuse is found, East Frisia's dispatch of troops will become forced use of troops, and forced use of troops is the easiest to be beaten up by groups. Europe in this era is similar to the spring and autumn period of China, emphasizing attacking the unjust. Moreover, killing the nobles of the other side is prohibited in national wars. Unless it is to quell civil unrest and face rebels, you can go on a killing spree. Of course, there are also ambitious people who seek to seize other people's territory and wealth. But the premise is that you have to find a good excuse. Even if you have to make up an excuse, you have to make up an excuse. Therefore, before using troops against Denmark, Marin must find a suitable excuse. Otherwise, he will become unjust. However, Marin knows that when Denmark takes the time to send a fleet to besiege its own port, who knows when it will take. Especially now that Sweden has the support of the other three parties. Therefore, there is no chance to expect Denmark to bully him this year. Therefore, Marin needs to find a way to let the Danes bully him before the end of the year, so that he can turn into Do-e, cry out for injustice, and then turn into the god of revenge to beat Denmark. But Denmark has no time to care about him at the moment. Did he run to the Danish King Hans to ask for abuse and insult? Marin fell into deep thought. After thinking for a long time, Marin suddenly remembered that his attack on Jever, which led to the accidental death of Hedwig, the princess of the earldom of Oldenburg, seemed to have not spread yet. If the matter did not spread, how could he occupy the moral high ground? Therefore, Marin decided to send people to kill and spread rumors in various countries, explain the cause and effect of the matter, and show his innocence. Hedwig was indeed not killed by his own people. In this way, Denmark and the earldom of Oldenburg will be anxious. If public opinion is not favorable to them, they will not be able to act rudely. So, at that time, they will definitely come out to refute. Even the Danish fleet might take the opportunity to transport grain and take the time to scare me. Yes, the Danes are now planning to use more than half of their warships for grain transportation during the autumn harvest. Only during this period of time will Denmark have the energy and strength to send a large number of warships to scare me. And what I want is for the Danes to bring their fleet to scare me. Under the witness of various countries, Marin can successfully play the victim. Then, sending troops to counterattack later will be justified, instead of forcing troops. So, before the autumn harvest began, Marin sent Kohler's gang of 3 religions and 9 streams to spread the news in various German states, explaining the war situation and Edo Wilmken's last crazy behavior to the people, and striving to get East Frisia out. Even the Earl of Oldenburg and the 2 duchies of Denmark in Germany began to spread the news. When Count John V of Oldenburg heard the news, his face suddenly became ugly. Damn, if you wash your hands, who will I go to blackmail 500 square kilometers of land? So, he sent people to spread the opposite news while sending people to ask his cousin Hans for help. After receiving the request for help, King Hans of Denmark thought for a long time, and then wrote a letter to Count John V of Oldenburg. Was there a third party present at the time? Count John V of Oldenburg naturally knew that there was no third party, so he immediately replied to Hans. King Hans was very happy when he received the reply. He sent a letter to John V, asking John V to immediately send someone to spread rumors that Marin's soldiers accidentally killed Hedwig. As a result, Marin deliberately made up a lie, saying that Edo Wilmken killed Hedwig. John V immediately did so and announced that it was Marin's men who accidentally killed Hedwig. Moreover, John V's people repeatedly emphasized who in the world would kill his wife casually. Many people immediately believed the propaganda of the earldom of Oldenburg, because, in the Middle Ages, it was indeed rare for people to kill their wives. Marin did not care about the propaganda of the earldom of Oldenburg, but continued to increase his own propaganda. Anyway, he vigorously promoted it just to anger Denmark, not to really clear himself of the charges. In short, as long as this matter gets out of hand, it will be fine. At the same time, Marin announced that he was willing to compensate the county of Oldenburg with 5,000 gold coins for this mistake. But while announcing the news, Marin also sent an envoy to provoke John V, and told John V in person that the county of East Frisia did not think that Denmark could spare time to trouble itself in the next 2 years. Because they haven't been able to get rid of Sweden yet. John V was so angry that he quickly reported to his cousin King Hans. King Hans of Denmark was also very angry. Originally, the idea of going to Marin to make trouble after pacifying Sweden was shaken. He wanted to act as soon as possible, the sooner the better. And Marin hoped to anger his opponent and let his opponent launch a siege on his own port in advance. At that time, Marin admitted his weakness in public and suffered a grievance. Well, there is an excuse for sending troops. Chapter 55, Colonial Development. America, Grenada Island. This is the 10th month since the colonists arrived. Grenada is a tropical island, and it is hot all year round. Therefore, the agriculture here is little affected by the seasons. Because the 4 seasons here are the same. In other words, there is no other season here, only summer. Last September, when the first batch of 400 immigrants arrived in Grenada, they began the difficult work of land reclamation. Fortunately, the local Arawak people welcomed their arrival. After Amerigo left Grenada, the Arawak village was once again attacked by the cannibalistic Caribbean people. However, with the help of the simple fortifications left by Amerigo, as well as metal spears and 10 bows, this small Arawak village called Bukas once again repelled the enemy's attack. When the 400 immigrant boys arrived, they were warmly welcomed by the Bukas tribe. The Bukas tribe enthusiastically arranged the immigrants in a place next to their village. When the immigrant boys began to cut wood and open up farmland, the Bukas people also came to help enthusiastically. Moreover, in the surprised eyes of the Bukas, the masons who came with the ship built a huge yard with the bricks and cement they brought. There were walls around it for defense. When the Caribbeans attacked again, relying on this large yard with cement walls, as well as the muskets and bows and arrows they brought, the immigrants easily repelled the enemy's attack. Even when the Caribbeans came, the governor of Grenada appointed by Marin, Old George, Old Hoffman's night attendant, who could read and write, also let the local bukas in to take refuge. But unexpectedly, after the bukas entered the yard, some of them refused to leave. The chief of the bukas, Labri, strongly requested George to build a large yard like this for them, so that their safety could also be guaranteed. In order to get a safe residence, Jean Labri, a bukas who was already in his 50s, even threw a tantrum in front of old George, who was a few years younger than him, just to get such a defensive yard. Old George didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so he could only agree to him first. Then, he wrote a letter and brought it back to Europe on the returning ship, hoping that Marin could allocate more cement. As for bricks, it was easy to deal with. They could be fired in earthen kilns on the spot. Then, old George first took the young men and used the bricks fired in the newly built earthen kiln to help the bukas people build a large yard next to the immigrant compound. However, the bukas people's large yard only had bricks and yellow mud, and no cement was applied on the outside. If you want to apply cement, you have to wait until the cement allocated by Marin comes. Of course, old George did not forget the business. After arriving in Granada, he first sent people to clear a small piece of land, planted the sugarcane seedlings purchased from the Madeira Islands of Portugal, and urged the Berber slaves who bought it to take good care of it. After all, Marin had told old George before that planting sugarcane was a very important task for Granada. There were not many sugarcane seedlings purchased from the Madeira Islands, only enough to plant 2 acres of land. However, as long as these seedlings were taken good care of, more would definitely be planted in the future. Old George was a person that Marin trusted, so Marin also told him the secret of making fertilizer. Therefore, in Fort George, the colony of Granada, all immigrants had to go to the toilet at a designated location. Then, the feces would be collected by several trusted serfs brought by old George, taken to a secret place, mixed with wood ash, dried and hardened, waiting to be used as fertilizer. In fact, the governors of the 3 colonies were all people that Marin trusted, and the production of fertilizers was basically controlled by them, and others could not interfere. Later, after Columbus came back, the spice seeds, rice seeds and Indian untouchable slaves he brought back were also sent to Granada. Then, old George arranged for these Indian untouchables to find empty land to plant the spice seeds and rice. Of course, the area was not large. Even the rice with the largest planting area only planted 5 acres of land. The seeds of other spices were basically planted in a small plot of land, and some did not even have an acre of land. As for the problem of cutting trees, it was also difficult here. However, the only advantage is that when cutting trees in Granada, the whole tree does not need to be moved to a certain place, but it is directly decomposed into small pieces on the spot. Because Granada is a tropical area, there are no oak trees. There may be precious wood suitable for shipbuilding, but Marin didn't know and didn't understand, so he didn't ask to keep it. Therefore, the local trees were directly cut down and then broken into small pieces. However, it is too difficult to dig the roots of those 1,000-year-old trees. 10 months have passed, and even with the help of the bukas, the immigrants have only reclaimed 1,200 acres of arable land. If there were no big trees, hundreds of immigrants would have reclaimed thousands of acres of arable land. In addition, old George also found that there was a big problem, that is, European cattle are not very adaptable to the humid and hot tropical climate. The hundreds of young men who immigrated, including old George, who was born as a knight squire, were all in good health and had no problems. However, the cattle bought from Poland probably adapted to the cold climate of Poland, but not to the tropical climate of Granada. Of the 200 cattle shipped by Marin, 90 died of illness. Of course, the remaining 110 Polish cattle gradually adapted to the local tropical climate. When George's report was sent to Marin, Marin was thinking about whether to get some buffaloes over there. Because cattle are not very suitable for paddy field farming. When Marin learned that Columbus brought back rice seeds and sent them to Granada, he was actually very happy. Because he could eat rice in the future. Moreover, Granada is a tropical island, hotter than Hainan Island. There, rice can be harvested 3 times a year, which is not a problem at all. However, there is a problem. That is, cattle are not very suitable for paddy field farming, and their hooves are prone to rot. Moreover, cattle are afraid of water, and buffaloes are not as adaptable to tropical areas. Therefore, Marin is thinking about whether to get some buffaloes over. In the Gotsi area of India, rice has been grown all the time, so there are naturally buffaloes. So, next time you go to India, buy some buffaloes that are adapted to tropical areas. Cattle can be raised as beef cattle in tropical areas. In humid and hot areas, they are finished as working cattle. Unless they don't have to cultivate paddy fields for growing rice. Not to mention the Granada area, the Amerigo Island and Cape Breton Island are unusually smooth. Except for the trouble of cutting down trees and digging up tree roots, agricultural activities are going smoothly. None of the cattle that were transported had any problems. Because the climate here is very similar to that in Poland, the cattle are very adaptable. It can be imagined that when the harvest season comes in September, the rye in these two places will definitely be a good harvest. As for soybeans, Amerigo Island also tried to plant them, and the situation was not ideal. Because it is an Indian variety, it may be accustomed to tropical climates and not very accustomed to temperate climates. Therefore, the germination rate of soybeans on Amerigo Island is only 60%, and the growth is also average. On the other hand, the 1-acre trial planting of soybeans on Grenada Island is growing very well. It is worthy of being a tropical area with a climate similar to that of India. However, Marin attaches more importance to the planting of North American soybeans. Although the soybeans on Amerigo Island grow in average condition, it at least proves that they can be planted here. By then, when the autumn harvest comes, Marin can pick out the best growing soybeans and keep them for seeds. After a few generations, these soybeans will adapt to the climate of North America. After all, soybean cultivation in the future will definitely rely on the vast land of North America. It is absolutely a waste to use the limited land in Grenada to grow soybeans. There, sugarcane, spices and rice are the most suitable things to be planted. In addition, the first batch of ginger in Grenada has matured. Old George arranged for someone to bring 1,000 pounds of ginger and ship it back to Europe for Marin to enjoy. In fact, Marin has also successfully grown ginger in the glass greenhouse outside Auric, and does not need ginger from the colony. However, it is also gratifying that Grenada can produce ginger in large quantities. Because ginger is also very expensive, it can be sold to others as a commodity. The growth cycle of other spices is too long, and Marin may not be able to wait. But ginger only takes about 5 months to mature. Marin can grow a lot of ginger in Grenada and then sell it in Europe. The price of ginger is not much different from other spices in Europe. Marin can make a lot of money by selling ginger. What's more, since Marin used ginger and brown sugar water to save Prince Juan, ginger has become a precious medicinal material and its sales are very good. Chapter 56, Layoun Phosphate Mine. In Layoun, Western Sahara, North Africa, Little Quincy, who is in charge of the local management, is counting the production of the first batch of apatite and plans to ship it back to Emden. Little Quincy is the grandson of Old Quincy, the gatekeeper of Hoffman Manor, and is only 23 years old this year. The Quincy family is a servant family of the Hoffman family. Their ancestors were serfs until Old Quincy became a servant of the Hoffman family. Old Quincy has no brains and average martial arts, ranking last among Old Hoffman servants. However, he is loyal. Therefore, Old Quincy has always served as the gatekeeper of Hoffman Manor to protect the safety of the manor. Later, when Marin became the Baron of Texel, Old Quincy sent his eldest grandson Little Quincy to Texel Island and arranged him under Kohler to learn arithmetic and culture. He is one of Kohler's disciples, ranking after Draka. 2 years ago, Little Quincy returned to the coal mine of Hoffman Manor and managed the coal mine for a period of time, responsible for counting production and safety management of the coal mine. When Marin took over Layoun, he thought of Little Quincy. In fact, Marin was not interested in anything else when he took over Layoun, but only in the apatite mine in the south of Layoun. As long as the apatite mine was mined, Marin would not have to spend too much manpower to collect fish meal and fish bones. Moreover, the phosphorus content of apatite mines is also higher than that of fish meal and fish bones. Because he had managed the coal mine for 2 years and had experience, Marin handed over the affairs of Layoun to Little Quincy to manage. In this way, Little Quincy was lucky to become the governor of Layoun. After arriving in Layoun, Little Quincy immediately built the Layoun wharf suitable for mooring large ships according to Marin's instructions, and then built a fort and strengthened the castle. Not only that, Little Quincy also built a large yard. Every night, the people of the Layoun tribe were driven into this yard to rest, and the door of the yard was locked to prevent them from running away. Before the large yard was built, more than a dozen young men had escaped at night. After the large yard was built, the people of the Layoun tribe could no longer run around. When the castle, fort, dock and yard were built, Quincy finally began to explore the apatite mine. He took a group of men, rode camels, carried a lot of food and water, and headed south from the Layoun dock to start his journey to find apatite. Of course, Marin gave a way to identify it. One is the blue-gray stone, the other is to burn it on the fire, it will emit green light. In fact, Marin's first identification method is no different from not saying it. Because most of the stones are blue-gray. In desperation, Quincy took firewood and looked for stones to burn everywhere, observing the color. After more than a month of burning stones, Quincy finally found an apatite mine not far from the south of the Leon Oasis Lake, with rich reserves. Quincy couldn't estimate how much there was, but it was estimated that there were still hundreds of millions of tons. Then, it was planned to mine. For this reason, Quincy sent people back to China to apply for a ship that specializes in transporting ore on the Leon route. Then, he applied for another sum of money to trade with the Sods and buy black slaves. Yes, buy black slaves. Moroccans also traded black slaves. They had a trade route in the Sahara Desert to the Mali Empire and the Songhai Empire in West Africa. This route was connected by several oases in the desert. And the oases were also transported by camels. Moroccan merchants first crossed the Atlas Mountains and entered the Algerian region to the east, and then went south through the oases in the desert south of Algeria, carrying salt and other urgently needed commodities in West Africa, and arrived at Timbuktu, the most prosperous city in the current Malin region, in this city, and traded with the locals. The climate in West Africa is hot all year round, and food is not easy to preserve. Therefore, salt is very popular in the Mali Empire and the Songhai Empire. Moreover, whether it is the Malin Empire or the Songhai Empire, which has now replaced the Mali Empire as the hegemon and controlled the West African trade center Timbuktu, there is a great demand for salt. However, the black people in West Africa did not know how to make salt, and the salt produced was relatively small, and most of it was picked up from the seaside. Therefore, this brought huge business opportunities to the Arab merchants from North Africa. North African Arab merchants and Berber merchants drove herds of camels and dragged bags of salt to Timbuktu to trade with the Mali Empire and the current Songhai Empire. In the West African Empire, salt was an important currency on par with gold. Whether it was the Mali Empire or the Songhai Empire, they used agate shells as currency for small-scale commodity transactions. For large-scale commodity transactions, gold and salt, as well as copper coins brought by Arabs, were used as currency. Strangely enough, the two major empires in West Africa had rich gold reserves. Through gold panning, the Mali Empire and the Songhai Empire obtained a large amount of gold sand. Then, merchants from the two empires used these gold sands to exchange with merchants from North Africa for salt, iron weapons. West Africa did not produce iron at that time, horses, copper, glassware resold from Europe, and North African handicrafts, including wool fabrics, etc. The commodities traded by West Africans to North African merchants were mainly gold, ivory, spices, cotton fabrics, and black slaves. The West African Empire was actually still in the era of the slave empire. Therefore, science and technology were not yet developed here, and the slave trade was also prosperous. West Africans used intertribal conflicts to capture prisoners of war as slaves and sold them in Timbuktu, the West African trade center, to Arab merchants in exchange for salt, weapons, horses and other materials that were urgently needed in the local area. In fact, the slave trade in Africa was not initiated by Europeans, but by local chiefs. Those poor chiefs had no gold and silver to exchange goods with the Europeans who came to trade. So, they started to think crookedly, to capture black people from other tribes as slaves and sell them to Europeans. Later, European colonists found that selling black people to American plantations as slaves was very profitable. So they raised the price and personally went into battle to destroy villages and capture black slaves, which caused the suffering in Africa. Long before the Europeans sold black slaves, the Arabs had actually been selling black slaves for hundreds of years. Moreover, the Arabs were very cruel. They prevented the black slaves they bought from having an affair with their wives and concubines, so they simply castrated the black slaves they bought first. In this way, it was safe to put them in the inner house. After Quincy Jr. came to Leon, he also dealt with merchants from the Sod tribe and heard about black slaves. It is said that these black slaves are obedient and honest, and they are strong and suitable for work. Therefore, Quincy Jr. planned to use black slaves to mine. As for why he did not use the local Leon tribe to mine, the main reason was that Quincy Jr. was worried that these locals would take advantage of the opportunity to escape during mining. After all, the terrain of the mine is complex and not easy to track. Moreover, Marin also planned to raise Arabian horses and merino sheep in the local area, and they also needed them to help with grazing. Therefore, it is better to buy some black slaves from the merchants in Morocco to mine. In fact, it is not to say that African slaves are obedient and honest. In fact, black people have a strong yearning for freedom. However, those black people who yearn for freedom have long been killed or crippled by slave owners. Therefore, the remaining black slaves are of course honest and obedient. They have seen the tragic end of those rebels. More importantly, the Arab slave traders castrated those black slaves inhumanely. Therefore, those black people lack the secretion of male hormones, and naturally they are depressed and have no desires. People who are aggressive generally have strong male hormones in their bodies. They either love to fight or love to find women. However, the black slaves sold by these Arabs were castrated, and there was nothing to excite them to secrete rapidly. Therefore, they are so honest. Quincy Jr. naturally needs honest and hardworking slaves to develop appetite minds. Therefore, purchasing those black slaves who had no desires and were relatively obedient became the first choice. However, when Quincy Jr. took the gold coins to buy black slaves from the Saud people, the Saud chieftain Abu Abdullah came refused to accept the gold coins. Because they needed iron more. The Saud tribe was an ambitious tribe. They wanted to rebel and defeat the Wadas dynasty, which now controlled Morocco. Therefore, they needed a lot of weapons. However, Morocco does not produce iron at the moment, and most of the ironware is imported. To obtain steel to make weapons, one must pass through the northern part of Morocco. However, in this way, the Wadas dynasty will get the news that the Saud tribe imported a large amount of ironware, which will arouse their vigilance. Therefore, over the years, the Saud tribe has not obtained much ironware. Now, with the opportunity to trade with Europeans, Abu Abdullah came proposed by black slaves. No problem, exchange it with swords or iron ingots. So, Quincy had to send someone back to Europe again to report the matter to Marin. But this matter was exactly what Marin wanted. Marin's steel mill produced 3 tons of pig iron and 2 tons of steel a day, and was worried about the sales. So, Marin asked the ship to bring a lot of pig iron ingots to Leon, so that Quincy and the Asad tribe could trade. As for the Saud tribe using these scimitars made of iron ingots to threaten Leon, Marin never considered it. Because Leon built a solid castle, and it was right by the sea. Even if the Saud people wanted to turn against each other, it would be difficult to break the castle. What's more, Marin thought that he could provide support from the sea at any time on the seaside. Therefore, Marin boldly bought ironware for the Leon people. The price of black slaves was outrageously low. When trading with the Saud people, Quincy only used a 50-pound pig iron ingot to exchange for a strong black slave. And it was a castrated, honest black slave. With only 5,000 pounds of pig iron ingots, Quincy Jr. exchanged for 100 strong, honest and hardworking black slaves. Then, after Quincy Jr. put shackles on these black slaves to prevent them from escaping, he assigned them to take picks and go to the apatite mine south of Leon to mine. They soon dug out the first batch of apatite and planned to ship it back to Europe. Chapter 57, Dividing the Beauty. In Europe, after Marin returned from Lubeck, he was surrounded by a group of men. But why did the men who surrounded him look a little embarrassed? After asking, Marin found out that these guys were thinking about women. Before, Marin had promised to divide the 2,000 Italian beauties. However, after returning, Marin was anxious to calculate Denmark with Lubeck, Hamburg and Sweden, so he temporarily forgot about it. Marin forgot, and his men were not happy. When Marin came back from Lubeck, he had just arranged for people to spread the news, and the soldiers nominated a group of representatives to come to Marin to ask for wages. Oh no, they came to ask for women. Standing in the front was the stupid big guy Khan. I saw Khan rubbing his hands, looking embarrassed. That, young master. What's the matter? Say it. That. Which one? Say it quickly if you have something to say. Marin kicked Khan. Master, where are our beauties? Beauties? Marin was puzzled for a moment, then slapped his head. Oh, I've been too busy recently, I almost forgot about this. Suddenly, a group of singles looked at Marin with extremely resentful eyes. You are no longer single, don't forget us. Sorry, I've been so busy recently that I forgot about this. Then, Marin quickly called Kohler to consult the results of the merit distribution. The merits of war must be counted. This time, the first merit of the attack on Yefer was given to Stade. His northern army was the most successful and rushed directly into Wangerland. The second merit was naturally the brave bombing of the bunker. Oh no. It was Doni Srui who bravely bombed the city gate. As for the third merit, it was naturally Khan who was the vanguard. Khan's merits naturally qualified him to ask for 2 beauties. Coincidentally, this kid's spring has also arrived. Moreover, this guy is very greedy, he wants 2 at a time. Kohler feels very ashamed of his elder brother Khan's behavior. Now, Khan and Kohler are both given the surname bodyguard by Marin, which means guards, and are no longer serfs without surnames. Bodyguard means guard in German. Marin gave the surnames of Khan and Kohler's family the bodyguard family, which is obviously a great trust and honor. Guards are the king's confidants. After being given the surname by Marin, Kohler paid great attention to the honor of the emerging bodyguard family. For his younger brothers and sisters, he also invested a lot of money to help them learn culture and court etiquette. However, Kohler was also helpless about Con, the elder brother. Since Marin brought back 2,000 Italian beauties from Italy, Con seemed to be suddenly stimulated and glowed with spring. Then, he opened his mouth and asked for 2 beauties, which made Kohler so embarrassed that he wanted to dig a hole in the ground. In Kohler's opinion, the bodyguard family is now considered a noble family. After all, the 2 brothers are now both barons, which is considered a hereditary noble family. But why is Con still so rustic? Kohler has also seen those Italian beauties, and they are indeed beautiful. But, they are all village girls. Village girls. In Kohler's opinion, it is better to marry a lady from a knight family who is not so beautiful than to marry a village girl. Marin actually disagrees with Kohler's idea. However, he cannot change Kohler's idea. But Marin likes Con's straightforwardness very much. Therefore, Marin also supports Con's idea, which makes Kohler lose his temper. Otherwise, he will definitely stop Con. Now, Marin's army is divided into 2 factions. One is the civilian faction, and the biggest boss among them is Con. This group of people were born from civilians and have no other ideas about marrying village girls. Anyway, Marin has agreed to help improve the girls' status. They were all promoted from civilians, even serfs, and they are not opposed to civilian girls. The other faction is the aristocratic faction, whose main representatives are officers from knight families. Although they also covet those Italian beauties. But they can't marry those Italian rural girls. Because, in their hearts, the concepts of rank and bloodline are deeply rooted in their souls and difficult to change. Even Schwartz and Kohler were influenced by the aristocratic ideas. Schwartz is a descendant of the nobility. He has been educated by his father since he was a child. It is not surprising to have such an idea. Kohler, after being named a baron and given a surname by Marin, believed that he had an obligation to revitalize this emerging aristocratic family. Therefore, he also began to learn aristocratic etiquette and seek marriage with aristocratic families. Unfortunately, most of the aristocratic families in East Frisia were destroyed by Marin, and it was not easy for these 2 people to find a suitable partner. Marin can understand both factions. Marin not only understands the civilians, but also appreciates them. Because they retain the civilian nature and do not forget their roots. However, Marin also understands the aristocratic faction. After all, it is normal to have such ideas in this era. In this era, people with a little bit of culture will have similar ideas. Just like the brothers Con and Kohler, although they both came from poor families, Con had little culture and belonged to the civilian faction. After Kohler read a lot of books, he became an aristocrat. The education of this era is that the aristocracy is supreme. In textbooks, the aristocracy is also glorified. As a member of the vested interest group, Marin naturally would not oppose this idea. Therefore, he also supports the aristocratic faction. After Kohler sent the battle merit statistics form, Marin took this group of single dogs to get women. Stade was born in a knight family. Although he won the first merit, he belonged to the aristocratic faction and gave up the opportunity to choose a civilian as his wife. Then, the first choice was naturally Doni Srui, who blew up the city gate. Although Doni Srui was also a descendant of a knight, he was a bastard and never regarded himself as an aristocrat. So, although there is a surname, there is no aristocratic thought. Therefore, he rushed into the group of 2,000 Italian beauties and began to choose from left to right. After a long time, the boy finally picked the right person. Marin was happy when he saw it, this boy was really sincere. The 2 beauties he picked were both big-breasted and big buttocks, and they could give birth at a glance. Then, he hugged the 2 shy Italian girls and left. Donitzri was knighted for his military exploits this time, and the 2 Italian girls he chose would be canonized as female knights by Marin later. Then, it was Con's turn to choose. Marin thought Con's taste would be higher, but he was disappointed. Con also picked 2 girls with big breasts and big buttocks, and they seemed to be real rural children. Kohler on the side was embarrassed to cover his face, and even felt a little ashamed to see people. I thought that after Con picked the beauty, he drooled on the spot. Next, it was the others. A few officers who were born as knights gave up the opportunity, and the other more than 300 meritorious people were not polite and picked a total of 350 Italian beauties. As for the remaining 1,650 Italian beauties, Marin was not in a hurry to divide them up. He wanted to whet everyone's appetite and stimulate them to make meritorious deeds. Because the time to take action against Denmark was getting closer and closer. With these beauties whetting their appetites, the soldiers under him would also be motivated to make meritorious deeds. Next, Marin was busy signing the documents of canonization. In addition to promoting the titles of some soldiers, he also canonized the selected Italian girls as female nobles in the name of Duke of Egypt. The attack on Yefer this time was not difficult. Therefore, the rewards for military exploits were not as high as before. In this war, the only one who was not promoted to the title of Baron was Stade, who was originally a hereditary knight. Because he did not ask for a beautiful woman this time, Marin simply gave him a grace, let his second son, who had no shadow yet, be canonized as a knight. As for the eldest son, he naturally inherited his hereditary knighthood. However, according to the military exploits points reward standard stipulated by Marin, if Stade makes another military exploit, he will be eligible to be promoted to a baronet, and then his status will be very different. However, this opportunity is not far away. Because Marin will take action against Denmark next. By then, there will be plenty of battles to fight. Chapter 58 The Decision of the King of Denmark. Denmark, Copenhagen Palace, King Hans of Denmark is listening to his subordinates' reports. Your Majesty, I heard a rumor spreading among the people today. Rumor? What rumor? Hans frowned. He has been very upset recently. The Swedish rebels have been unable to conquer Denmark for a long time, causing Denmark to spend a lot of money in food to suppress the rebellion. In addition, a large number of warships have been mobilized to blockade the Swedish coast, which is also very costly. The huge cost made Hans a little overwhelmed. Therefore, recently, he plans to recall more than half of the warships to transport food. Because the autumn harvest is coming soon. Intelligence Officer Bilson continued to kneel on one knee and said respectfully, Your Majesty, there have been rumors among the people recently that your cousin was killed by the defeated Baron Edo of Jever in the civil war between Count Marin of East Frisia and Baron Jever, but your cousin, Count John V of Oldenburg, deliberately insisted that it was the Count of East Frisia who killed her in order to blackmail East Frisia. Humph. King Hans was a little angry, and at the same time, there was some embarrassment in his eyes. Because, this really revealed the truth. And King Hans' face was a little embarrassed. Yes, the Count of East Frisia once sent an envoy to tell Count John V of Oldenburg. What? King Hans asked coldly. It is said that Denmark is deeply involved in the Swedish battlefield and will not be able to deal with it in a few years. Let King John V not count on Denmark to support them. This sentence is not a folk rumor, but Marin's envoy really said it to John V. The official stationed in Oldenburg by Denmark passed the news back. Asshole. My Danish army is invincible, why does it take a few years? At most 1 year. Well, next year, we can almost suppress the rebellion of Sweden. King Hans was a little lacking in confidence. A few days later, the letter from Count John V of Oldenburg also arrived. John V cried to his cousin John, saying that Marin did not take the powerful Kalmar Union seriously and despised the Oldenburg family. Then there were a lot of things, in short, they all showed that Marin despised Denmark. Although he had known the news for a long time, when he saw the letter, King Hans of Denmark was still furious. Damn kid, do you think you dare to go against the powerful Kalmar Union just because you have some strength? I will let you know what regret is. The angry King Hans called several trusted ministers to discuss countermeasures. Because the spread of rumors was very bad for Hans' plan. Finance Minister Dalson said, Your Majesty, I think this rumor was deliberately spread by Count Marin of East Frisia. The purpose is probably to force your Majesty to be cautious about your words and finally give up the original plan. Humph, how can my plan change because of a rumor? Moreover, I will punish him twice as much. King Hans was a little angry. Because his dark thoughts were seen through. Your Majesty, I think that since the other party has seen through our thoughts, we might as well act early to avoid more trouble. Navy Minister Thomason suggested. What do you mean? King Hans seemed to have grasped something. Your Majesty, aren't you planning to transfer 100 warships to transport grain during the autumn harvest? I think it would be better to transfer these 100 warships to surround the port of Emden. Denmark needs to transport grain, and East Frisia, which is vigorously developing trade, must also need to transport grain. Why don't we take advantage of now to block the 100 warships outside the port of Emden and put pressure on the county of East Frisia? If they disagree, we will burn all his merchant ships. Yes, we will also send a large army to surround Auric and capture that kid Marin. Minister of the Army Simonson was unwilling to let the Minister of the Navy shine, and he also wanted to show his presence. Simonson, your army is now in Sweden, what can you use to surround Auric? Moreover, the county of East Frisia has an army of 10,000, and its combat effectiveness is very strong. Thomason said to his old rival Simonson with contempt. But, if we don't send out the army, will that guy surrender? He should. I heard that his finances are very dependent on foreign trade. There are dozens of merchant ships entering and leaving Emden every day. If we surround the port of Emden and threaten to burn all his merchant ships, I don't believe he won't surrender. But we not only ask him to pay compensation, but also ask him to cede such a large jever. Will he agree? Simonson retorted. Didn't he have jever before? Didn't he come here anyway? Besides, which is more important, finance or jever, which he didn't control before? Without foreign trade, his finances will collapse. How will he support those 10,000 troops? Without our army, his 10,000 troops will be disbanded because they can't get paid. Thomason said firmly. Well said. Hans appreciated Thomason's words. If there is financial difficulty, even he, the King of Denmark, can't afford to support 10,000 troops, let alone Marin, the Count of the small East Frisian state. Therefore, as long as Emden is besieged, the opponent will have to surrender. Then, several other ministers also expressed their support for this idea. In fact, the king has applauded, what other people can have any opinions? In this way, after the meeting, King Hans of Denmark ordered that 100 of the 200 warships that blockaded the Swedish coast be mobilized to surround the port of Emden and put pressure on Marin. At that time, Marin was forced to cede Jever to the county of Oldenburg. At the same time, he was required to compensate the Danish king with 100,000 gold coins to offset the cost of the Danish navy's deployment. 100,000 gold coins, in this era, is definitely a lion's mouth. Back then, King Richard I of England was captured by the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, and he only asked for a ransom of 100,000 pounds. And the county of Oldenburg died of a little princess, and not only did they ask the county of East Frisia to cede 500 square kilometers of land, but they also asked for 100,000 gold coins in compensation, which was simply too much. Chapter 59. Okay, I give in. The order of King Hans of Denmark was soon transmitted to the southern coast of Sweden. Therefore, the Danish fleet divided half of the warships, a total of 100 ships, and returned to Copenhagen to assemble, and then prepared to go to the East Frisian kingdom to encircle Emden. After seeing the 100 warships, Kohler, a spy sent to Copenhagen by Marin, learned about the movements of the Danes after a little inquiry. So he immediately boarded a merchant ship to Lübeck. After landing, the horses were ready. Moreover, there were people to pick them up along the way. After a long time, after changing horses and relaying, Marin received intelligence from Denmark the next afternoon. It's just as I expected. Marin waved excitedly. Then, he called the fleet commander Kid, you quickly lead 8 warships and 15 250 class armed merchant ships to leave the port of Emden and stay in Thurench for a while. Without orders, you are not allowed to come back. Captain Kidd was a little puzzled. Why did all the warships have to be transferred? Emden port is not to be protected. In fact, Marin was deliberately showing weakness. Denmark has always been arrogant and doesn't care how many warships East Frisia has. Even if there are, it is certainly far less than 100 warships. As for the dozens of merchant ships in the port of Emden, Marin will not transfer them all. If there is not even one merchant ship, the Danes will definitely be suspicious. Even if these merchant ships are destroyed by the Danes, it is not a problem. How much is a merchant ship? Marin can afford it. In short, this time, Marin must play the image of a wronged little wife to life and make the outside world sympathize. Then, when Marin attacks Denmark, no one will think that Marin is a bad guy. 10 days later, the Danish fleet arrived late, and hundreds of warships directly blocked the estuary of the Ems River, scaring the fishing boats of the fishermen in East Frisia and West Frisia, and they dared not go out to sea to fish. Seeing the local fishing boats fleeing in panic, the Danish naval officers and soldiers laughed and even pretended to chase them, scaring a West Frisian fishing boat to capsize on the spot. Marin stood on the top of Emden city and used a pull-out monocular telescope to look at the direction of the Ems River estuary. He found that the momentum of 100 warships was indeed huge, and it felt a bit boundless. This momentum alarmed George, the Duke of Saxony, who was still leading troops in West Frisia to confront the West Frisian resistance trapped in Leeuwarden. At first, George was also shocked, thinking that Denmark had some ideas about the Hanseatic city of Groningen. However, when he learned that the Danish fleet was coming to surround Emden, he immediately laughed up to the sky. Ha ha ha, Marin boy, you have this day too. Although he had to support Marin to join the imperial house of nobles in the imperial parliament last time, George's resentment towards Marin did not decrease. After all, the humiliation of being captured is difficult to wash away. If it weren't for the rebels in West Frisia, Duke George would have wanted to form an alliance with the Danes to rob East Frisia. However, thinking that his supply line from the Duchy of Saxony to West Frisia would pass through the county of East Frisia, Duke George had to be patient and restrain his desire to stand up and taunt Marin. Soon, Danish Foreign Minister Holsen and Oldenburg Foreign Minister Goldberg came to Auric with a haughty attitude. What? You want me to cede Jever and pay 100,000 gold coins? This is impossible. Marin actually wanted to admit his defeat immediately, but this was unreasonable and would make people suspicious. Therefore, the anger and unwillingness that should be there must be pretended. Therefore, after seeing the diplomatic documents handed over by the other party, Marin pretended to be angry and yelled. Lord Marin, I know you are dissatisfied. However, Princess Hedwig is the cousin that His Majesty the King values most. You must pay the price for accidentally killing Her Royal Highness. Danish Foreign Minister Holsen said calmly, his eyes were full of disdain, and Marin was so angry that he really wanted to beat him up. I emphasize again that Princess Hedwig was not killed by me, but by her husband Edo, who was crazy and killed her. Marin said loudly. Lord Count, may I ask if there is a third party present to testify for you? Also, do you think it is normal for a husband to kill his wife? Goldberg, Foreign Minister of the Earl of Oldenburg, asked aggressively. This. Marin really couldn't refute this. There was indeed no one else present at the time, only his own army and Jever's army. And Jever's army, the living ones, became his prisoners. Therefore, people on both sides cannot serve as fair witnesses. But who the hell would have thought of such a thing? Do you have to bring a notary to the war? It's a problem. Besides, even if Marin had a reason, he didn't want to really refute it. So, he acted out his true colors and acted like a person who was at a loss for words. I don't care, I didn't kill Princess Hedwig, and neither did my men. Since you insist on denying it, then we have nothing to say. Holsen decided to terminate this negotiation, so he took Goldberg away first. He planned to notify the Danish fleet first and teach Marin a lesson. Sure enough, the next day, the Danish fleet that was originally blocking the mouth of the Ems River launched an attack on the port of Emden. Of course, there were not many cannons on their ships, and they were all small caliber. Therefore, the Danes directly discharged the sailors and burned 10 merchant ships that stayed in the port of Emden. Of course, the people on the merchant ships had already escaped. Then, with a complex mood of both joy and anger, Marin ordered the Prime Minister Geoffrey to strongly protest to Holsen. Protest, why did the Danes burn our country's merchant ships for no reason? Among them, there is one from the Hanseatic League Hamburg, and another one from Lübeck. Holsen was shocked. He didn't expect that just burning a few ships, there are also Hanseatic League. In fact, the two ships are simply East Frisian merchants. However, before Marin sent Geoffrey to protest, he suddenly had an idea. Damn, the Danes burned the merchant ships of Lübeck and Hamburg, isn't this the best excuse to start? Otherwise, let Lübeck and Hamburg go to war on the grounds of being taxed, the reason seems not sufficient. The ships were burned by the other side's navy, what a good excuse. In this way, Marin temporarily added drama and falsely accused the Danes of burning the ships of Lübeck and Hamburg. At the same time, Marin also sent people to Lübeck and Hamburg to let them protest together and provoke the topic first. Although surprised, the Danes really didn't care. Aren't they just two ships? Why did they have to stop at Emden? In a few days, Geoffrey, on behalf of Marin, protested more than a dozen times and issued 8 solemn statements. Of course, the Danes ignored it. When Holsen threatened to burn the remaining dozens of merchant ships in the port, Marin finally gave in with a look of unwillingness. Then, in front of representatives of several other countries, Marin signed a compromise agreement, with humiliation on his face, agreed to cede Jever, and promised to pay 100,000 gold coins. Those representatives of other countries were actually invited by Denmark and the county of Oldenburg, just to let everyone see Marin's embarrassment together. Marin couldn't wait for this. The more embarrassed he was today, the more reason he had to send troops tomorrow. It's just that he was so excited about embarrassment. Am I a bit psychopathic? Marin signed this humiliating treaty with a very complicated mentality. In the sympathetic eyes of several foreign representatives, Marin kept thinking about the question of whether he is a pervert, so he was a little distracted. In the eyes of representatives of other countries, he was understood as distraught. Yes, anyone who was blackmailed for such a large piece of land and 100,000 gold coins would be distraught. Therefore, Marin's expression was very appropriate and very appropriate. I dare not say that I can win the Oscar statuette, but it is more than enough to win a golden elephant or 100 flowers. Chapter 60. Let's find excuses together. After signing the unequal treaty, Marin, full of grief and indignation, issued an order, ordering the 2,000 soldiers and horses originally stationed in the Jever area to pack up, withdraw from Jever, and hand over Jever to the earldom of Oldenburg. However, before leaving, Marin deliberately let his soldiers empty the good things in Jever, as if he would not come back in the future. In response, the army of the earldom of Oldenburg who came to take over the territory reported this matter back. But Count John V of Oldenburg did not care much. Because this is the most normal reaction. If Marin ordered his troops to withdraw from Jever and did not offend anyone, it would attract attention. Because this land is not yours, and if you do not offend anyone, do you still expect to fight back in the future? Therefore, Marin's behavior of letting his men plunder local property is the most normal reaction. Although it is a pity, John V does not care. Because, with such a large territory, if it is well managed, what is the little property that is robbed? Lübeck and Hamburg were also very happy after receiving Marin's letter. Marin had a falling out with the Danes, so there was no need to find an excuse to send troops. The two Hanseatic cities were currently thinking about what excuse to use to send troops. Before, the two families planned to use Denmark's increase in tolls in the Øresund Strait as an excuse to declare war on Denmark. However, this excuse was a bit far-fetched. Because, after all, Denmark's increase in taxes was a trade dispute and would not lead to a war. Now, the excuse sent by Marin is quite good. The burning of their own ships by the Danish navy was definitely a malicious provocation. Of course, the burning of merchant ships was not enough to start a war. However, putting the two excuses together was barely enough. After getting Marin's hint, the two Hanseatic cities sent representatives to strongly protest against the Danish navy's burning of their two merchant ships and demanded an apology from King Hans of Denmark. Moreover, after discussion, the representatives of Lübeck and Hamburg, who were very bad, came up with an excuse that was unethical. They said that their burned merchant ship was full of spices such as pepper. The Hanseatic League knew that Marin had sent ships to India to buy back a large amount of spices, and Denmark knew it. Marin even engaged in spice wholesale in Emden in order to attract merchants to trade. Therefore, it was natural for Lübeck and Hamburg merchant ships to come to Emden to buy spices. However, the burned merchant ship was loaded with spices, and the value was very different. The two cities claimed that their burned ship was loaded with spices worth more than 30,000 gold coins. Therefore, Denmark needs to compensate for the losses. This kind of nonsense plus blackmail, the arrogant Danes naturally refused to pay attention and directly refused. Although they were rejected, Lübeck and Hamburg secretly enjoyed it. These two representatives who had an idea were also rewarded and promoted after returning. After all, burning a ship and burning a merchant ship full of spices are two completely different concepts. The value of the goods was more than 30,000 gold coins, and some poor earls could not afford to pay. Denmark also spent a lot of money to suppress Sweden, so how could it be willing to pay so much money to the two Hanseatic cities? In this way, the two cities would have more excuses. The merchant ship was charged protection fees when passing through the Øresund Strait, which was an excuse. Now the spices on the ship were burned, which was another good excuse. It is not surprising to start a war with these two excuses. You know, in the early Middle Ages, because productivity was extremely low, two lords could fight for a box of bees. Although it is the 16th century now, it will not be shameful to draw a knife for a little honey. However, it is not uncommon to fight for a ship of spices. After hearing the excuses that the representatives of the two cities came up with, Marin wanted to give them a thumbs up. In fact, it was done so beautifully. What's more beautiful is that the arrogant Danish King Hans really rejected the two cities' request to compensate for two ships of spices. It's no wonder that the two cities started a war. Marin now wants to go to Lübeck and sit down with the representatives of Lübeck, Hamburg and Sweden to negotiate and discuss the dispatch of troops. However, before that, everyone needs to do one thing, that is, to help Sweden. Because the autumn harvest has begun, after Denmark mobilized a fleet to blockade the port of Emden, these 100 warships did not return to the Swedish coast to continue to participate in the blockade, but went to Denmark, the Principality of Holstein and the Principality of Schleswig to transport food. Denmark is a country with many islands. Except for Jutland Island and the two principalities, most exchanges between other regions require shipping. Even its capital, Copenhagen, is located on Zealand Island, not on the mainland. And the grain production on Zealand Island is obviously not enough to maintain. Therefore, Copenhagen needs to mobilize food from other regions. Even Denmark needs a lot of ships to transport food to southern Sweden to supply the army. Since Sweden declared independence, the Danish army has invaded southern Sweden and occupied many places. These places also need food because of the war, which has caused agricultural production to stagnate. Therefore, the task of transporting food during the autumn harvest is very heavy. In this way, the fleet blockade on the Swedish coast will be much weaker than usual. This period is also the best time to support Sweden through sea transportation. Therefore, Marin also sent 2 merchant ships, loaded with food and weapons and armor, to the Swedish coast to support Sweden. With enough food and weapons and armor, the Swedes can hold on for a longer time and cause greater casualties to the Danes. Lübeck and Hamburg also intend to take the opportunity to provide financial and material support to Sweden. Only when Sweden has delayed a large number of Danish troops in Denmark, the other 3 will unite and stab them in the back, so that they can be more confident. Moreover, during this period, Marin's East Frisian state itself will also have to harvest the wheat on the ground in autumn. Only after the autumn harvest will there be time to free up hands and fight Denmark. For this reason, Marin drove all the young and strong laborers under his command to the ground, and rushed to harvest food together, so as to strive to store food as soon as possible. Even most of the soldiers in the army need to take turns to go to the ground to help the serfs harvest food to increase the longitude of the autumn harvest. Seeing that everyone in the field was bending over and struggling to harvest with sickles, Marin was a little helpless. Manual harvesting is too slow. A skilled worker can only harvest about 2 mu of land a day. Therefore, everyone can only use manpower to pile and harvest together. Not only is it slow, but it is also easy to get backaches. Marin wanted to make a harvester to replace manpower, so that people would not have to work so hard. However, the harvester is too complicated. He can't handle the internal combustion engine alone. He has no problem drawing a blueprint for a steam engine, and the principle is simple, but the internal combustion engine is a bit complicated. It's not that Marin has never learned the schematic diagram of the internal combustion engine, but there are some things in it that he really can't figure out. For example, the spark plug in the machine. Modern people go to the store to buy one, it's easy, but in ancient times, I couldn't figure out how to make it. That kind of alloy spark plug, Marin can't figure it out even if he kills him. There are also rubber oil hoses and transmission rubber belts. Anyway, they are not something Marin can handle. Even for the stupid big and crude steam engine, Marin only knows the principle, and if he wants to make it, he has to rely on Ada and others for help. Therefore, whether it is sowing or harvesting, it can only rely on manpower, which takes a long time and is inefficient. In order to speed up, Marin even sent most of the 10,000 troops to the fields to help the serfs. Most of these young men who are mercenaries are also poor children from rural areas, and they are not unfamiliar with doing farm work. After all, this is an agricultural society, and most people live in the countryside, so they are naturally familiar with doing farm work. The young men did not feel uncomfortable working in the fields.